Whitman's words, the sum of all reverence is in you, and that religion and Bibles come out of you and may come out of you still. Happiness not in another place, but this place, not another time, but this time. He was a precursor to what was probably the religion of the late 19th and early 20th century, the religions that came out of us still, the idea of psychoanalysis and the unconscious. The mind is a mystery. Why do we do the things we do? Our actions only tell part of the story. What are the forces that animate us? Who are we inside? Is it possible that there are forces inside us that secretly control us? Do humans have a soul? And what does it respond to? These are the questions pondered by psychoanalysis. Behavioral psychology, which I talked about last week, focuses on observable actions and tangible rewards. Psychiatry is focused at the chemistry of the brain. Psychoanalysis tries to infer the unobservable. It analyzes the mind, the psyche, the soul. The journey into the intuitive makes psychoanalysis the science that most resembles religion. It is a far-reaching field, and I could not even attempt to summarize. Well, I am attempting to summarize it in 20 minutes, but I understand that any condensation is a distortion. But I want to familiarize you with some of the terms and some of the people. The principal founder of psychoanalysis was Sigmund Freud. And in 1899, he wrote a book called The Interpretation of Dreams. He supposed that the dreams were examples of the unconscious seeking the fulfillment of wishes. He believed we were only partially conscious of our wishes. Like an iceberg, most of our thoughts are under the surface of the sea. What we perceive as ourself, he called the ego. And the ego seeks to balance two conflicting forces in the mind. Rising up from the bottom is the id, guided by the pleasure principle. If it feels good, do it. Coming down from the top is the superego. It contains all the shoulds and should nots that one learns from culture. It includes religion, politics, and family norms. The health of an individual, according to Freud, is determined by how well her ego manages the conflict between the id and the superego. Freud often described the drive for pleasure in sexual terms. At an early age, an infant competes with the same-sex parent for the attention of the opposite-sex parent. In 1927, Freud wrote The Future of an Illusion, in which he conceived the worship of a Father God as an illusion stemming from the unconscious wish for a protective father. And Freud states that the time has come for replacing the effects of oppression by the results of a rational operation of the intellect. But Freud was not the only psychoanalyst. He started the idea of looking into the unconscious, but other practitioners found different things bubbling up from the mysterious depths of the psyche. Just as different priests have looked to the same heaven and have found different gods, different psychoanalysts found different motives coming up from the human psyche. Carl Gustav Jung worked with Freud during the early 20th century, but eventually separated from Freud. Jung's big difference with Freud was that he believed that the unconscious was not just personal to the individual. Jung developed the concept of the collective unconscious. It consists of the ancient wisdom that evolved with humanity. The human struggle, in Jung's opinion, was not resolving the psychosexual traumas of infancy and childhood, but rather in the search for understanding. In Modern Man, Searching for a Soul, written in 1933, he writes, "The great decisions of human life have, as a rule, far more to do with instincts and other mysterious unconscious factors than with conscious will and well-meaning reasonableness. Every civilized human being, whatever his conscious development, is still an archaic man at the deeper levels of his psyche. Just as the human body connects us with the mammals and displays numerous relics of early evolutionary stages, going back even to the reptilian age, so the human psyche is likewise a product of evolution, which when followed up to its origins shows countless archaic traits." And in Man and its Symbols, a book published in 1964, a few years after his death, Jung almost equates the collective unconsciousness with God. Because we cannot discover God's throne in the sky with a radio telescope or establish for certain that a beloved father or mother is still about in a more or less corporeal form, people assume that such ideas are not true. I would rather say that they are not true enough. For these are the conceptions of a kind that have accompanied human life from prehistoric times and that still break through the consciousness at any provocation. Generally, people have perceived Jung as more friendly to religion and that Freud was more hostile to religion. And with quotes like we read for The Lighting of Our Chalice, where Freud equates religion with neurosis, you can see where that reputation would get developed. But another psychoanalyst, Erich Fromm, in his book Psychoanalysis and Religion, suggests that it's more complex. He writes, "Freud holds that the aim of human development is the achievement of these ideals: knowledge, reason, truth, logos, brotherly love, reduction of suffering, independence, and responsibility. While there are certain differences of accent among these teachings, Buddha emphasizing the reduction of suffering, the prophets stressing knowledge and justice, and Jesus' brotherly love, it is remarkable to what extent these religious teachers are in fundamental agreement about the aim of human development and the norms which ought to guide man. Freud speaks in the name of the ethical core of religion and criticizes the supernatural aspects of religion for preventing the full realization of these ethical aims." For Jung, the religious experience is characterized by a specific kind of emotional experience, surrender to a higher power, whether this higher power is called God or the unconscious. Fromm asserts that Freud is an advocate of humanistic religion and Jung an advocate of authoritarian religion in that it required surrender. Fromm continues, "While in humanistic religion, God is the image of man's higher self, a symbol of what man potentially is or what ought to become, in authoritarian religion, in authoritarian structures, religion becomes the sole possessor of what was originally man, his reason and his love. The more perfect God becomes, the more imperfect becomes man. His only access to himself is through God. In worshiping God, he tries to get in touch with that part of himself which he has lost through projection. Projection is a psychoanalytic term of saying what's really in you, you see in other people and other things. I think Fromm identifies an important split in religion. For some, religion is what one does. For others, religion is about understanding. Freud saw religion in the extroverted expression of religious ethics. Jung, an introvert, who, by the way, developed these terms, introvert and extrovert, chose to focus on the internal mystery. Ethics stresses the right and wrong things to do. Jung took a different take on the process of living. He wanted people to understand their whole selves, not just the good parts. He came up with the concept of the shadow self. Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. Furthermore, it is constantly in contact with other interests, so it is continually subjected to modification. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. To Jung, the ethical behavior that Freud and Fromm desire is not possible without submitting to the collective unconsciousness, without going through those dark places of grief and greed and all those things that are part of being human. One can't just recognize an illusion and discard it. One must enter into the myth, so much that self-understanding may be the truest form of ethical action. In Psychology and Religion, Jung writes, if you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all his projections, then you get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. That means if you're ready to say that all these things that I think are wrong with the world really reflect something that's wrong with me, you come to a place where you might be feeling pretty bad about yourself. You're embracing a pretty thick shadow. Such a person has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say that they do this or that, and they are wrong, and they must be fought against. He lives in the house of gathering. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong in the world is in himself. And he only learns to deal with his own shadow has he done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic, unsolved social problems of our day. Just as charity begins at home, fixing the world begins at home as well. Freud and Jung were different people, and as a result, their psychological theory was different. Even Fromm, who supported Freud's take on religion, differed with him about what motivated humanity. He did not think human beings were so conflicted about early parenting. Rather, he thought that human freedom was a motivating factor. People either found the courage to be free, or they took their place in a system of dominance or submission. Reading these quotes that come before 1970. The word man rings in my ear over and over again. And I often say, well, maybe we should translate all those things, because by man they meant humanity. But then you read some of the stuff and you say, no, they might have just meant men. They weren't even, they really didn't care too much about women. And so I bring up another major figure in psychoanalysis, Karen Horney, is a female psychoanalyst, and she rejected Freud's notion that all women had penis envy, and rather she strove to resolve conflicting social drives. She saw life as more than dependence or independence, as Fromm saw it. She saw people as very complex. They had drives of compliance, moving towards people, the need for affection and approval, the need for a partner. But also in these same human beings, you have conflicting needs, the need for power, the ability to bend wills and achieve control, the need to exploit others, to get the better of them, that competitive thing that we often find in ourselves, and the need for social recognition. We all like a little bit of glory, and the need for personal admiration, both inner and outer, the need for personal achievement, that I actually have done something worthwhile. And then there are these parts of us about detachment, moving away from people, the need for self-sufficiency, something that is very strongly expressed throughout the history of Unitarian Universalism, and the need for perfection. And William Ellery Channing, when he was developing Unitarian Universalism, would talk about Jesus as the perfect human, and that we should all strive to make our lives perfect. And would quote from the Bible, be perfect even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So there was a sense, and Emerson followed up this strain in his Transcendentalist movement, which also include Whitman, who we talked about earlier. And then there's also the need to restrict life practices. That sense, that need for simplicity. We're always so busy. I've already listed 9 conflicting needs that are going back and forth, and there's always, when you're doing all this work, you say, why can't I just sit in a room with a chair and just shut down for a while? So Horney had this sense that there's all these needs, and they're inherent in the human condition as we struggle. But in almost any psychoanalytic theory, and I could list more theorists, and they would have different things about power, about death wish, and all these different things. But the common thread is that we as humans are coping with something. Drives or needs or archetypes that are larger than us as individuals. These concepts take on the roles of the principalities and powers. In the religious context, these concepts are attributed to the mind of God. In psychoanalysis, these concepts are in the mind of humanity. Love, power, truth. Do these come from above or from within? What is ultimate love, ultimate power, ultimate truth? Do we submit to the ultimate, or do we strive to be the ultimate? Are we dependent or independent? I think Horney's theory points to the idea that we are, in fact, interdependent. She writes, All the drives for glory have in common with reaching out for the greater knowledge, wisdom, virtue, or powers that are given to human beings. They all aim at the absolute, the unlimited, the infinite. Nothing short than absolute fearlessness, masterliness, or saintliness has any appeal for the neurotic obsessed with the drive for glory. He therefore is the antithesis of a truly religious man. For the latter, for the religious, only to God are all things possible. The neurotic's version is nothing is impossible to me. His willpower should have magic proportions, his reasoning be infallible, his foresight flawless, his knowledge all-encompassing. The theme of the devil's pact begins to emerge. The neurotic is the Faust, who not satisfied with knowing a great deal, but has to know everything. And so she really identifies that conflict that's in the Garden of Eden when they take the apple because they want to be as gods. There is that thing in humanity to strive that is the healthiest thing in the world. And to think one has arrived, or to think that one is horrible for not arriving, is the unhealthiest thing in the world. So we're caught in this interdependent web where everything in us tells us we should be the best. We should continue trying. But yet at the same time, whenever we fail, we go into shame spirals and say, gosh, I should have did this, I should have did that, oh my goodness, how can I be such a wretch? Or we think we've made it because we're blind to all of our real failings. And we all know both of these people. Sometimes it's all of us. And both of these people are hard to hang around because they're wallowing in their perfection or imperfection rather in the notion of the striving, the interdependence, that we are at the same time wholly dependent on that goal that we're striving for, but yet independent in our striving. And we have this sense. Yet whenever we're out of balance, we are always negotiating with a world beyond ourselves or within ourselves. Freud would say it was the ego struggling with the id and superego. Some religionists would characterize it between the struggle between God and the devil, standing on either shoulder. Jung would say one tries to find one's authentic self by finding harmony between the ideal and the shadow self. Whether we conceptualize reality theologically, psychologically, both or neither, we find ourselves caught with this middle feeling. Powerful and powerless. Individual, yet part of a collective. Unique, like everyone else. Ordinary. Active and passive. Independent yet dependent. The interdependent web of all existence, which we are a part, the seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism, recognizes this paradox of the human condition. We need each other in order to become truly ourselves. We are influenced by unseen forces that are hard to describe, but it's worthwhile to try. By sharing our stories, we see our common humanity and our individuality. And so I invite you now, including the therapist amongst you, and all of you who are experts on your own life, which is all of you, to share your impressions of psychoanalysis and religion and how they interact. And why did Oh, it's just, okay, great.
I have to. If it had not been for psychoanalysis, I wouldn't be standing here with you people today. It was my lifeline. It isn't for everybody. It really isn't. It's a long, hard process. I finally went out to California and got a degree in depth psychology. That included Jung, which was my way of having a personal analysis. But I also spent, I don't think you knew this, Charlie, I spent 4 years in a training seminar for psychoanalysts in Memphis, where I would fly back once a month, being part of that group, not as a trainee, but a hopeful. But in the end, I didn't apply. So it is not for everybody. It really isn't. But if I was religious, but I didn't think there was a God. That was the interesting thing for me, and I think that's true for a lot of people. So I think Jung is great. And by the way, he wasn't all that religious. The word Geist stands for spirit in German. It also means mind. And he was he was also interested in physics and even wrote a book with Wolfgang Pauli about physics. So I am defending him.
I appreciate very much your discussion of this, and I'm not going to overanalyze. We just got back from 5 weeks of teaching in Mexico in the Mexican schools, and we were very happy to be there, and we're happy to be back. But I love this quote that says, "The sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being." And what I take that to mean that we have within us the power to choose, and to choose light over darkness. Thank you.
Just a real brief thing. That when I went to medical school, there were several of my classmates going into psychiatry, and they were the nuttiest of us all.
I just finished reading a book by a neuroanatomist who was rising in her career, and she suffered a stroke in her left hemisphere. And needless to say, she couldn't walk, talk, or do anything, but her right brain was still functioning, and she saw this as an opening, a connectedness to everything. And this has, of course, it took her 8 years to get her left, works going and everything, but she has had many insights from just experiencing only the right side of the brain. Very interesting book. My Stroke of Insight by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor.
Just a comment. I'm a proponent of William James and Charles Peirce and pragmatism, and that is the overlay for me relative to everything that you have said. What works is what I believe in.
I very much appreciate everything that you shared this morning, Charlie. Something that occurs to me from everything you shared is the idea of the complexity. I mean, I really think they're, kind of like the idea of both and, or perhaps all of the above. It seems to me that the idea of striving for self-understanding, self-knowledge, plus being open to that which is all around us, above us, below us, within us, connectedness with all. It seems to me it's kind of the idea of spirituality and or religion is really encompassing everything, the all.
Charlie, I once met Freud when he came to North Carolina and Worcester, Massachusetts. And I must say, I listened to everything and once about a book of his, but I didn't believe in what he was telling us. And if I talk to psychiatrists around there, they say, oh, no. And some were psychoanalysts up there in Massachusetts. But I don't know if they're still there.
I mean, that's the thing that I think happens with people who groundbreak. They kind of bust down the dam. Their theory is full of all the rubble from the dam that they're busting down. And the subsequent practitioners refine and change and reinterpret what might have been happening in Freud. Even Freud has been subject to psychoanalysis, many books. One and then right behind you.
My comment is that a period in my life I spent in a lot of self-introspection, and I just found myself getting more and more depressed. So I decided that, and I've sort of thought that psychoanalysis was pretty much so self-involved that nothing else got done in terms of trying to help or change the world. So I've given up on the self-introspection.
Well, I think the comment that it's not for anyone, that I think that, like with that quote from Jung about, well, gee, you grasp your own shadow. Well, sometimes our own shadow and our own sense of evil can just crush us and make us incapable of moving forward. And if we have tendencies towards narcissism, perhaps, and that you have a great therapist who's going to break you of that.
So you can stand the shadow. The shadow is 80% gold. This is what Jung said, and it's true. So don't knock the shadow.
Oh, integrate.
Well, this discussion has made me realize more than ever that I am a UU, because as a therapist, when people ask me, okay, what theoretical base do you use? I say, depends on where the client is. When I talk about religion, I say, I don't care what religion you are. I think we all worship the same God. And I don't think it matters what psychological theory you use. They all have benefit. It depends on what works for that person.
I'm sure we can discuss this for as long as we want to on each other's couches and forever. That I ask you to join in hymn number 300 with heart and mind, which after all is what this is all about.